quite impossible to conclude that the use of buildings to accommodate asylum seekers inherently creates a real concern, such as that which attaches to an institution such as a bail hostel or a chemical factory. It's about the Smith judgment provides a helpful touchstone in the present case for judging whether the fear of crime should be a material consideration. And the facts bear some consideration. Smith considered an appeal decision about the continued use of land as a gypsy caravan site. There was evidence of previous criminal antisocial behaviour at the site, which adjoining residents were fearful would continue. And I'm just going to refer to the footnote here. The judgment refers to a number of incidents. For example, residents have previously experienced some quite alarming events, one involving over 100 officers, of whom 18 were armed, backed up by 3 dog handlers and a helicopter. So that was the context. The inspector's conclusion in the case of Smith that fear of crime was a material consideration was rejected as unlawful by the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal said this: first, not only had the number of incidents diminished, but those reported to the inquiry couldn't be reliably attributed either to the appeal site or to the applicants. Second, it was necessary in order to take these incidents into account to attribute them not merely to the individuals concerned, but also to the use of the land. But a caravan site isn't like a polluting factory or a bail hostel, likely of its very nature to produce difficulties for its neighbours. Granted that the evidence of recently past events attributable to the site was sparse or, in a strict view, non-existent, the fear must be that the concern as to future events was or may have been based in part on the fact that the site was to be a gypsy site. And emphasise this bit: it cannot be right to view land use for that purpose as inherently creating the real concern that attaches to an institution such as a bail hostel. In the same way, in the present case, many of the anecdotal accounts of criminal activity cannot and should not be directly attributed to asylum seekers. Moreover, as it would be quite wrong to proceed on the basis that the use of land as a gypsy or traveller caravan site presents an inherent risk of criminal activity, so it would be misguided, especially in the evidence presented to the inquiry, to reach the same conclusion about buildings providing accommodation to people seeking refuge and asylum. In cross-examination of Miss Wood, it was suggested to her that because the police had made recommendations, that means the concerns of local residents about the fear of crime are in some way justified. But we rebut this in the firmest possible way. First, the consultation response is clear. There is no evidence of an increase in crime from the arrival of refugees. This would include crimes committed by them or to them. Second, the police were commenting on mitigation of risk, not on the likelihood of criminal behaviour. It would be negligent not to mitigate against potential risk. And in the same way, it would be ridiculous not to provide security features into the construction of apartment block or student accommodation in an area even of exceptionally low crime. Third, the consultation response wasn't conditional upon the measures listed below being implemented. Staffordshire, said this: Staffordshire Police have no objections to this application, but would like to raise the following. If the police had genuine concerns that a risk of crime would arise if the measures were not provided, then the letter would surely have been expressed differently. In other words, their lack of objection would have been conditional upon those recommendations being implemented. Alternatively, they could have objected outright. Finally, and in any event, the recommendations of the police will be implemented, and as such, the risks identified are being mitigated. So I'm going to just depart briefly to respond to paragraphs 9 and 10 of Malone and Friends closing submissions, where there's an implicit criticism about leaving a variety of matters to an operational management plan. So if that is a criticism, it's unfounded, because the whole purpose of the management plan condition is to allow the local planning authority to take an overview and enforce if necessary as to the way in which the site has been operated on a day-to-day basis. So the existence of that condition does not undermine the appellant's case, nor does it indicate a weakness in it. So back to text, paragraph 38. The council's case, as the police representations make clear, is based on the fear of the unknown and doesn't come close to meeting the test set out in West Midlands Probation Committee and Smith. As such, it can't be a material consideration in the present case. Finally, we should address paragraph 130F of the framework, which encourages development to be places that are safe, inclusive and accessible, and where crime and disorder and the fear of crime do not undermine the quality of life or community cohesion and resilience. First, this policy is within the design section of the framework. There's nothing about the design of the building that results in a fear of crime. Second, the allegation of a fear of crime resulting from the proposal is, according to many members of the public who spoke, because of the specific characteristics of the residents as asylum seekers. For the reasons set out above, there's no evidence before this inquiry of asylum seekers being predisposed or more likely to commit crime than non-asylum seekers. The tests from West Midlands Probation Committee and Smith are not met, so neither is paragraph 130F breached. So if you disagree and conclude that the fear of crime is a material consideration in the particular circumstances of this case, then the weight that can be afforded to it must be significantly reduced to the point of being very limited because of the mitigation measures that are being taken. First, the vast majority of the suggestions under the subheading security in the police consultation response will be implemented. This will include management of access and ingress from the site, managed by Securitas. The recommendations of the fence may not be implemented because it's not currently considered that it improves security, and it goes against the principle that those housed in the Stafford Court are not being detained. They do not need to be, and they should not be deprived of their liberty. They haven't been convicted of a crime. Concerns were expressed by members of the public that the rooms in the Stafford Court would be too small, forcing people outside onto the street. The size of the rooms are agreed with the local planning authority and secured by condition, and they exceed what would be required if Stafford Court was subject to house and multiple occupation licensing. Once operational, the facility will be subject to inspection by the council housing officers, and Councillor Trowbridge accepted that those officers would do their job effectively, so if concerns about conditions within the building arose, they would be addressed. Next, Serco will facilitate activities for those housed within Stafford Court. There's open space within the courtyard area. Residents will be free to come and go as they wish, with access to the facilities within Stafford. This includes religious facilities and community groups. Serco's experience is that the overwhelming majority of individuals going through the asylum process keep themselves occupied. Serco has experience with their partnership team that activities are organised with local partners for residents to enjoy. This has included open events for local people to attend, to meet those in the site and to get to know them and their journey. It also includes having facilitated over 24,000 hours of socially valuable activities in the emergency hotel accommodation. I'll pause there briefly to respond to a point my learned friend made at paragraph 38C of the closing submissions, where the comment is made, Serco does the Home Office's bidding, which seems to be to provide very little. So that's in light of the evidence we've heard, that is an unfair characterisation. But even if it had some basis, the condition requiring the approval of an operational management plan will allow the local planning authority to have regard to the activities which are going to be proposed, both on-site and which may be provided off-site. So revert to text, so paragraph D. Each asylum seeker who doesn't have their own funds receives £45 a week. Whilst this can't support a luxurious lifestyle, Serco have found that it is adequate to ensure that each individual can be fed, clothed and bathed. The residents often grouping together to purchase food and eat together in shared spaces. Next, it is of course possible that some residents may have mental health issues. In those circumstances, the individual will have full access to the necessary services to treat any mental health issues. The site will be well managed by Serco, who are experienced in this area, and I've already mentioned, sir, the condition requiring an operational management plan will be secured through the grant of permission and will involve oversight by the local planning authority. There'll be 24-hour day, 7 days a week staffing with at least 30 full-time equivalent staff on site, which doesn't include the provision of security by Securitas. There's already a close working relationship with the police and other agencies that will be continued through the management of Stafford Court, and briefings will be given to new residents as to expectations about behaviour and cultural awareness. When these mitigating factors are taken into account, should you agree, sir, that evidence has been provided to support a conclusion that the fear of crime is a material consideration, then the weight to be given to it can only be very limited. Drawing all this together, it was succinctly, powerfully and accurately summarised by Mrs. Alcock in her evidence to the inquiry. When asked if a fear of crime was justified based upon seeing asylum seekers in the street, Mrs. Alcock said no, and she was right. As such, the central plank of the council's case must fall away. So I deal with social inclusion next. We expressed the view in opening and repeat it in closing that this element of the council's case is difficult to categorise. I didn't improve actually having heard the council's case. In reality, this element of the council's case is a thin reformulation of the fear of crime argument. This is apparent from the absence of a definition proposed by the council or Mr. Wedderburn on precisely what they mean by social inclusion. This is clear in the reliance on policies that do not in any way support their case. Paragraph 92 of the framework is not a development management policy to the extent that it does not place a requirement on development. It states aims for new development. To the extent that the policy is to be applied to the appeals scheme, then the proposal complies fully. Subparagraph A places an aim on new development to promote opportunities for meetings between people who might not otherwise come into contact with each other. The asylum seekers that will live in the appeals scheme, albeit temporarily, will be free to come and go as they please. They will be in the community. For example, they'll be shopping and attending places of religion. There'll be community engagement activities run by Serco to encourage the existing residents to meet the occupiers of the scheme. It is also anticipated, as in many other cities and towns across the country, that voluntary groups and religious institutions will forge close links with the asylum seekers, thereby helping them assimilate into society and challenging preconceptions that some people hold. The final subparagraph of NPPF paragraph 92C encourages healthy lifestyles. There is nothing about this proposal that denies opportunities for the residents to live a healthy lifestyle. There's a courtyard for exercise within the site and the residents will be able to access all local services. Consequently, when one considers the way in which Stafford Court will operate, as well as the track record of Serco and voluntary groups in creating links with the local community, then there will be every opportunity for meetings between people who might not otherwise come into contact with each other. There is no conflict with national policy relating to social inclusion. Finally, I'll just say a few things about public health resources. This part of the council's case doesn't bear scrutiny and wasn't pursued with any real vigour by the council during the inquiry. First, the appellant will provide and maintain a medical room for health screening of initial accommodation residents, as well as other healthcare services for that cohort. The funding for the medical room is provided by the Home Office and therefore will exert no demand whatsoever on existing healthcare services. This is precisely what has been requested by the ICB. Second, to the extent the residents in dispersed accommodation will need to access healthcare services, they'll be entitled to do so, as would every new resident in the area. However, for each new patient, whether they be an asylum seeker in dispersed accommodation or new to the borough, GP practices will receive funding. The ICB implicitly recognised this reality in their representations, since they didn't seek any funding from the appellant towards existing or new healthcare services, nor have they since. So in conclusion, the development accords with the development plan, and there are no material considerations that indicate it ought to be determined otherwise. So even if you were to conclude that the fear of crime is a material consideration, its weight comes nowhere close to outweighing the significant benefits of this proposal and meeting an urgent need for asylum accommodation. As such, the appeal should be allowed and planning permission granted, subject to the imposition of necessary and appropriate conditions. So unless I can help you any further, those are my closing submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Easton. That nearly draws things to conclusion. There haven't been any foreshadows as far as I can make out, but I will just double check whether any party would like to make an application for award of costs.
Not us, sir, thank you.
No, I'm getting a head shake from.
No, sir. Sorry, I was on mute.
That's fine. Thank you for confirming. On that basis, I think we can draw matters to a conclusion then. But the one sort of loose end, if I can call it that, is the sort of final set of conditions in whatever form it is. In an ideal world, I'd like an agreed set, but I recognise we may not get there. But if that is the case, if I can have a sort of Scott type schedule identifying the areas of disagreement and the preferred wording of each party and just explaining why, that would be very much appreciated. I indicated earlier that sort of close of play tomorrow would be what I've got in mind. Are there any concerns about that as a time frame?
So not for our part. So I think that the council has been impressively responsive to certainly the last couple of days.
Okay.
To changes. I'm sure that will continue.
That's helpful, thank you. Well, on that basis, I'll ask for that by close of play tomorrow, and I'm not really bothered when that is, as long as it's with me via the case officer the following morning. So I'll perhaps say 6 o'clock, but hopefully it'll be before then. Are there any other matters before I close the inquiry?
Not for our part, no. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you both. I think it just leaves me to thank everybody who's had an input into the inquiry today and last week, and everybody who we may not have seen, but has been busy in the background allowing things to run smoothly. So my gratitude to everybody. Thank you very much, and I shall now close the inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.